Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Tradecraft Security Weekly. This week I'm going to discuss some Windows privilege escalation techniques, one of my favorite topics. Specifically, I'm only going to be talking about local privilege escalation techniques though. Later on in another episode, I'm going to discuss some network-based privilege escalation techniques as well. And then we'll also do one that focuses on Linux as well. But this one's specifically Windows. So let's just jump right in. So admin access should be rare. In pretty much every scenario that I can think of, standard employees shouldn't have administrative access to their systems. One common thing that I've seen is where a remote worker, let's say you have somebody in an organization that goes off site from the standard office, they're out for the day. A lot of times they carry a laptop with them, and a lot of times network admins decide to give them administrative access to their own system for the sake of troubleshooting. And a lot of times we'll see we'll get handed a laptop for an assessment and we already have admin access, and that's just, it's not a good thing. So one thing that I wanted to mention though too is network admins not only have to worry about provisioning the access correctly, right? They not only have to worry about making sure that users have the correct permissions over their own systems, but they also need to worry about vulnerabilities on those systems as well that could allow a non-privileged user to escalate those privileges. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. The question sometimes we get is so what if users are admins? What could you actually do with that? Well, it leads to many other attack vectors. For one, you could extract the local password hashes from a system and then potentially use those against other systems. A lot of times we'll find that the local admin password isn't being randomized across multiple systems. So it's very easy to just take a password hash and perform a pass the hash attack and just hop from system to system by simply just having admin access to one system. Additionally, you could do network level types of attacks. So for example, if you have admin access to a system, you can start up SMB servers and perform poisoning type of attacks like LLMNR, NBNS poisoning. You can also, you could do packet capturing on the local host, so you might be able to sniff something coming across the wire there. You can, obviously users who are admin, they can install software. And then, additionally, if you're an admin, you can typically extract clear text creds from memory, provided it's not, the latest version of Windows, because, they've actually done some nice mitigating efforts against that. It's bad for just its typical user to have admin access to a system. So what are some common privilege escalation techniques that I use, and I think a lot of other people will end up using too. So one thing that I always look for first when I get access to a Windows box is just check for missing patches on the system, because there's plenty of exploits and vulnerabilities out there from Microsoft itself for privilege escalation vectors on systems. So you can run this WMIC command to find the latest hotfixes that were installed, the latest patches that were installed on a system, and then you go compare that to a list of potential patches that have exploits available for them in terms of privilege escalation. So what you could do is search exploit DB from Kali with the tool called Searchsploit. Searchsploit is really awesome, and the fact that you can give it a number of different search terms and search for specific exploits regarding what you want. So if you wanted to search for an MS16, a KB article for Windows in a local privilege escalation type of vulnerability, you could do searchsploit MS16 Windows local. So if you knew the system hasn't been patched in 10 years, you could search MS08 or whatever, or MS 07, and find a number of different potential exploits for the patches that are missing from that system. Another thing that I always like to do in terms of finding additional access, not necessarily privilege escalation, but it could lead to privilege escalation, is finding credentials from a user for other sites. And one of the best ways to do that is say you've got access to a user's account on a system. You can usually extract their credentials from their browser history or from the browser. So a lot of times, people click the button to store credentials, for example, in Chrome or IE, and those credentials can be extracted fairly easily. There's a few Metasploit modules to go and extract them. In addition to not only just the credentials, but cookies can be extracted as well. And potentially, if they had a login to a site, let's say that there's some sort of admin of a SIM portal or something. You might be able to log into the SIM and find an additional vector there somehow. Another tool that just came out pretty recently from FireEye is this tool called Session Gopher that will find stored credentials for PuTTY, OneSCP, and RDP. Potentially, giving you additional access to another system, which might be useful. Another really awesome privilege escalation technique came out recently. It was Hot Potato, right at the end of 2016 there. This one was released. And it's from Foxglove Sec, and it's basically a vulnerability in which it's possible to fake a WPAD proxy on a system, do an NBNS spoofing, and then have basically like you perform like a Windows Defender update, and it will basically man in the middle that connection out and allow you to utilize like that system level privilege that the Windows Defender update is using against the own system to run something. So you could tell it to run a command you wanted to run, like let's say add a new user or something, and add a new admin. So very cool there. And the last thing, and I think this is probably the most important thing that I've seen in terms of privilege escalation in the last few years, is PowerUp from Harmjoy. It's an amazing PowerShell tool that will check a number of different things, including finding hijackable DLLs. It'll find unattended install files, various modifiable services, and in addition to that, it also provides various tools for actually exploiting those. So not only will tell you like, here's a vulnerability, here's something that you might be able to exploit, here's a tool to actually go write like the binary or write the DLL that you could use to hijack that process. So that's the tool I wanted to demo today because it's pretty fun. So let's go over to our PowerUp demo. Okay, so we've got a Windows 7 box here. We've got a current user as mvirs, and we'll go ahead and net local group administrators to show that our mvirs user is not in the local admins group. He's not a domain admin. So we shouldn't be able to really run anything as an admin currently. So let's go ahead and run PowerUp to see if there's any privilege escalation vectors that he might be able to exploit. So let's go ahead and run PowerShell.exe-exec bypass. And we're going to import the module PowerUp. So with PowerUp, there's, like I said, there's a few different specific modules for the various different vulnerabilities that you might want to run, or if you want to run all of them, you can run invoke-all checks, and that will check all the privilege escalation vulnerabilities that PowerUp knows about. So you can see right here, it tries to first just say, hey, is this guy in a local admin group? Checks for various unquoted service paths. It checks for service executable and argument permissions, checks for service permissions, checks for a lot of different things that commonly might lead to privilege escalation. And a lot of times we found a number of these different things are in fact vulnerable on systems that we're testing against. One specific thing that I have found kind of often is always install elevated in the registry. So I decided to kind of demo that one here because I have seen it a few times on various assessments. So this one is kind of a really terrible vulnerability because what that essentially means is if always install elevated is enabled in the registry, that essentially means that any user, regardless of whether or not they're an admin or not, can run any executable as an admin. That's really bad because all a user has to do is create a binary that adds a new local admin or does something that they want to do maliciously, run it just like a normal user would run a program, and it will automatically run that program as an admin. So like I mentioned earlier, Harmjoy added in like the various functions to actually perform these various exploits against these vulnerabilities, which I think is very awesome. So for example, the write-user add MSI is what we're going to do to write out an MSI file that will create us a new local admin. So write user add MSI. So after we've already imported PowerUp, we just run write-user add MSI. It will generate this new user add MSI right here on the desktop. And let's let that finish up. And then once that's done, when we run it, it will allow us to either, here we go. So when we run it, it'll allow us to add a new user. We can name it whatever we want. You have to go to password. On this current system, I actually have to modify the default password because it doesn't meet the password complexity requirements for the system. It does need to the password you put here does have to actually be a valid password for the system or it won't work. So you give it a username you want, you give it the password you want, and the group we want is administrators. So let's go and create. And now let's go check local group administrators. And we have our new backdoor user right there. So if we wanted to, we can now go run a command as the backdoor user, and that would be our administrative user on the system. So essentially, we've escalated privileges using PowerUp. Pretty neat, huh? So all right, that is it for this edition of Tradecraft Security Weekly. One thing that you probably want to go do, this is for the blue team anyway, is for each of your standard Windows images, like prior to you pushing them out or reinstalling on new systems, run things like PowerUp against them and check them for privilege escalation vulnerabilities. That way you're not just pushing out vulnerable software into your environment and allowing any normal user to escalate privileges. I've also got a couple more privilege escalation Tradecraft Security Weeklies coming up in the near future, so stay tuned for those. I'm going to do one for Linux and also one for network level vulnerabilities, which will be a lot of fun. So follow me on Twitter. I'm at DapTech on Twitter. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.